Where do you want the
Yep.
markers? Okay.
Should we be on either side of?
No, I don't.
You should be
What?
front.
I should be in the middle.
You
Yeah,
should
that's
be
what
in
I
the
was like.
middle.
I always end up front and center.
So you're good? She'll just use this one. Yeah. Can I jump in?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
Because you made it happen.
I'm having fun with these things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect.
type stuff out.
Yeah. Well, I typed for my note that I took for when we typed last time.
It just floats so naturally. I don't need to.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Hey, Chris. We're going to get this pathway going. It's a good bunch of students to put it together.
Good morning, everyone.
I just want to shut this phone completely
Good morning,
down.
everyone. Welcome again to another in our series of our Conversations With. My name is Dawn Walker, and I'm Vice President of Communications and Marketing at Downstate. Today, we are having a wonderful discussion, but I'm going to leave that for our Chief Medical Officer to explain to you because I think it's much more important coming from her than it is for me. So while I have her here, I just want to introduce you all to Jamila Yusuf. She is our Chief Medical Officer. She was appointed 2 years ago and is the first female Chief Medical Officer here at Downstate. Thank you. Jamila, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We are absolutely thrilled to have Dr. Jeff Birnbaum, along with our guest speaker, Jonathan Santos. And I'm going to first introduce Dr. Birnbaum. Dr. Birnbaum is an associate professor of pediatrics and public health at SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University. He is the principal investigator and executive director of the Health and Education Alternatives for Teens, also known as HEAT. Dr. Birnbaum is an adolescent medicine specialist and board-certified pediatrician who has focused most of his professional career working with HIV-infected youth. He has provided medical care to thousands of HIV-infected youths aged 13 to 24 at HEAT since 1992. Dr. Birnbaum, however, has actually been at Downstate for the past 40 years as a medical student 41, thank you, as a medical student and later as a resident. He devotes much of his time to community mobilization efforts to identify and engage HIV-positive youth in care and high-risk HIV-negative youth in PrEP services. Dr. Birnbaum has served as a board member for the SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University HIV Center for Women and Children and Institutional Review Board. He has served as a liaison to the New York State Department of Health AIDS Institute's Pediatric Adolescent Ambulatory Care Guidelines Committee, which sets the standards for HIV testing and medical care for HIV-infected children and adolescents in New York State. Dr. Birnbaum has pioneered efforts in Brooklyn to engage young gay, bisexual males and transgender youth from communities of color in medical care, prevention activities, and HIV counseling and testing efforts. These efforts have brought access to research, care, and services for a marginalized population that typically avoids medical providers due to stigma, fear, lack of insurance, and lack of knowledge about HIV. He has lectured widely on issues relating to HIV/AIDS and adolescents in the United States and abroad. His overseas HIV technical assistance work has been conducted in Poland, the Czech Republic, Russia, and Nigeria. He has also served as a consultant to the World Health Organization and UNICEF in developing guidelines for service development for HIV-infected adolescents and young adults in resource-poor countries. Dr. Birnbaum's work with HEAT has been recognized with several prominent awards. Dr. Birnbaum accepted an award from the New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg on World AIDS Day in 2009, recognizing HEAT's outstanding work with HIV adolescents in New York City. In December 2012, also commemorating World AIDS Day, Dr. Birnbaum received the Linda Laubenstein Award for Excellence in HIV Care from the New York State Department of Health AIDS Institute. And in 2013, Dr. Birnbaum received the SUNY Chancellor's Excellence in Professional Service Award. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Birnbaum. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yusuf. I say, who is she talking about? I'd like to introduce Jonathan Santos-Ramos, who we know each other many years, although we just reconnected after a very long time. just last week when we met in preparation for this, so it's really great to be able to introduce him and interview Jonathan today. So Jonathan Santos-Ramos is the Chief Program Officer of Care for the Homeless. Prior to stepping into this role, he served as Interim Executive Director of Callan Lord Community Health Center, a great place, for about a year. And previously, he was Senior Director of Planning and Sustainability at Callan Lord, focusing on long-term strategic initiatives to support the organization's growth. He remains as a strategic advisor to Callan Lord until a new CEO takes the helm. His career spans several decades in public health, where he and I crossed paths many years ago, with a focus on HIV and health equity. Formerly, he was the Center Director for Community Healthcare Network, another great organization, Community League Health Center, serving the underserved, uninsured, underinsured, and immigrant communities of Upper Manhattan and the South Bronx. Previously, he held the position of Deputy Director of Business Systems and Strategy and Strategy Unit in the Bureau of HIV Prevention and Control in the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, also a great organization. Jonathan holds a master's in public administration from Baruch College and a bachelor in arts in women and gender studies from Rutgers University, the State University of New Jersey. Jonathan spent most of his high school years at Fajardo Academy, Fajardo, Puerto Rico. So welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you.
So, Jonathan, you have a really illustrious background, really worked your way up through the ranks over the years. We first met each other when you were in the TEACH program way back when. It's probably in the early 2000s, thereabouts.
Yep.
And I believe that was before you were working at Callan Lord. So, as kind of a focal point, to talk about your personal background and this trajectory you've been on through your career, maybe you could start off talking a little bit about TEACH.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing HIV prevention since the mid-90s. I started as a peer educator doing HIV education, sexual health education in Newark, New Jersey. And that sort of snowballed, and when TEACH came about, which was most known for the folks who started the house ball study, that took about 31 of us, 31 folks from the community, taught them for about a year and a half, 2 years, on everything public health, including outreach, health education, technology, advocacy, and policy, and then released us to the 12 organizations that sponsored us, hence when I started with Callan Lord. And so that program, out of the 31 of us, many of us are still leaders in nonprofit organizations across the city. And I've been fortunate to have met you there in our outreach efforts, but then have been able to kind of grow that career in mostly HIV prevention, even through my work with the New York City Department of Health, and then sort of transitioning with HIV adjacent with a community healthcare network, and now with Care for the Homeless.
So a lot of folks may not be familiar with the house ball community. It's something we have a shared passion. You as a member, and somebody who has served the house ball community for many years. I can give a real simple explanation is that a lot of young people, LGBT folks, are kind of, in particular LGBT young folks of color, kind of throwaway youth. They're rejected by society. They're living on the outskirts of the mainstream. And the house ball community is sort of an alternative family structure, which people gravitate to into individual houses. And these houses have very, I don't know if I'd call it informal or formal.
It's pretty formal now.
Family structures with house parents and the children. So we could talk a second about that, because you mentioned getting recruited into TEACH as a peer educator and the full role. And there were 31 of you. We often talk about the untapped human potential in the house ball community among young people, and I just think it's great that your potential was tapped into, and look at you today. So maybe you could talk for
Yeah,
a moment about the house
absolutely.
ball community.
So when I arrived from Fajardo, Puerto Rico, I shortly found the streets of New York City as a homeless teen, and mostly on Christopher Street piers, where many of what would become my family hung out and took me in. And so that is actually where I first encountered the HOT band, Health Outreach to Teens, which is a medical mobile unit from Callan Lord that serves homeless LGBTQ plus youth. And it turned the corner and I got in. And so that was my first introduction to LGBT health in that sense, being a homeless youth and later becoming part of a house ball family.
Great. And, you know, when we talked a week or so ago, we just spent so much time talking about how, like, neither one of us has chosen our careers. Our career found us. And you've been on this incredible trajectory. So maybe you could talk a little bit more. I mean, I gave kind of the bullet points of it, but maybe you could talk about how you've risen through the ranks in different roles that you've played.
Yeah, so, you know, having been a peer educator and then, you know, experiencing homelessness in New York City and then getting into the TEACH program really sort of gave me the foundation. As you mentioned, it chose me. I had no intention of being in public health, no intention of working in a nonprofit. At one point, it was Broadway or death, right? But that did not happen and that did not work out. And so, you know, I think that, you know, in many ways, HIV prevention gave a lot of queer folks, LGBTQ plus folks, a job for the first time, you know, outside of like retail, for instance, right? And so it was the first time where we were recognized as being experts in our own communities, right? And being experts in our own lives. And with folks like yourself opening up spaces for us to come into and flourish and learn, you know, I think that I was able to really sort of hone that power and have a group of folks that were also growing in the same way. You know, I still, you know, some of the folks who were part of TEACH are my family members, right? And although now part of different houses, but still family. And I think that it's extremely important what HIV prevention has done over the years for young men who have sex with men, for instance. Myself as a queer Latinx cis male, right? You know, and having a space to be able to bring all of my identities to work, right? And work for my communities, I think is extremely important and is what got me hooked, and I've been hooked ever since.
That's great. We spent a lot of time talking about what's happened in the HIV world over the last 20, 25 years. Not the 41 that I've been here in it, but just the last 20 to 25, where it seemed like for myself and for you, HIV, working in HIV prevention, as you say, and for me, prevention and care, we both responded to a calling. Like the world was very different right back then. There was no response, and people just got organized, made a lot of noise, and then when programming started, people just started rising to the occasion. And these days, HIV just seems to be shoved off to the side. And a lot of what we've done in LGBTQ health was really spurred on by the AIDS epidemic. And it just seems that the calling seems to have dissipated. And a lot of the energy seems to have disappeared, and I often walk around lamenting, oh, nobody cares about HIV anymore. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, the differences between then and what you see now, and how we get the new generation of young people inspired to continue the work.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, HIV prevention and treatment was LGBT health then, right? And fortunately, it's much more than HIV nowadays, right? As we continue to learn more about our communities and social determinants of health and comorbidities, and to your point, HIV has taken a back seat a bit. When you look at, for instance, the last 3 years with the pandemic and all of us switching our focus towards COVID and the likes, mpox, monkeypox, et cetera, the Department of Health, New York City Department of Health reported last World AIDS Day that HIV diagnoses was up 14%, right? And so that proves that we're not paying as much attention to the prevention and have switched focus, right? And so we are seeing an uptick again. And part of that is because we haven't only switched our focus during the pandemic, but it's become a larger sort of effort that has many components, and that HIV piece has taken a back seat, and it needs to be just as important as the other diseases in the LGBTQ community that we are trying to prevent and treat.
Yeah, it seems that prevention goes on at the community-based level. In 2020, the community just shut down, and lots of people who had community-based jobs, they just left the field. Yeah. And so it's no surprise that you see prevention infrastructure having an impact, or the loss of a prevention infrastructure having an impact on new cases of HIV being identified. We're going to come back to some other things related, but tell us about what schools you went to growing up, and did you choose those schools for a specific reason, or did they choose you?
So I think Rutgers chose me. I started there, again, thinking I was going to do fine arts, but fell into women and gender studies with a focus on queer lit, and was fortunate enough to be co-chair of YEGO, Queer People of Color, Rutgers University, for about 4 years. And that really sort of heightened my sense of belonging and advocacy and sort of my political approach to equity. And so I think in that sense, Rutgers definitely chose me, even if I didn't recognize it then. And then Baruch, I did the executive MPA program, Master's in Public Administration, with a nonprofit management focus. And I chose that because I was working full time, right? And not all of us can, take a break from working full time and go to school. And I knew that I needed a graduate degree. I wanted a graduate degree. I wanted to go back to school. I'd missed it. And so, and I didn't want to spend, the next 10 years taking 2 classes every semester. And so Baruch really offered me the opportunity to do a program where it was every Saturday for 2 years. And so I worked through the week as center director at Community Healthcare Network, finishing up opening a family planning center in the Heights. And I would do that Monday through Friday. I would do Baruch Saturday and Sunday with homework and the such, and was able to complete that. So in that sense, I chose it, but the cohort that I joined was a cohort of about 15 nonprofit and governmental folks, and I'm still very, very much close to them, and yet another extended family. I just keep on adding to the family.
The family planning clinic in Brooklyn Heights. It's in Brooklyn, Washington Heights.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This is Brooklyn. So
Yeah.
Gotta ask. Gotta ask. What about high school, Fajardo Academy?
Yeah. So I grew up half here, half there, as many of my family members and many of my fellow Boricuas have done, going back and forth from the New York City metro area to the island. And so when I was in school here, I was spending summers and all breaks there. And when I was in school there, I was spending all summers and breaks here. So it feels like a half and half in a way. But Fajardo Academy is a very, very small bilingual school that was created for military families that weren't living on the base. Puerto Rico is only 33 by 103, but at one point had 13 military bases. And so the school was originally founded for those families, and my class was a size of 8. When I was there on the island, and when I transferred up here to Passaic High School in New Jersey, my class was 480 something, and so it was a bit of an adjustment.
And if I can ask, between both of those schools, what was your experience as a queer youth?
So I wasn't out in Fajardo Academy. I wasn't out while living on the island. One of the reasons why I decided to come up and study here was so that I can live my authentic self. I had come out to a few family members, my friends knew, but it wasn't a welcoming environment for me at that time. It's gotten a little better. Unfortunately, we are still seeing murders and violence towards LGBTQ folks, particularly trans-identified folks. Outside of that, or rather inside of that, was my family. I was raised Pentecostal and am the child of associate pastor, and her father was associate pastor for many, many years. And so that structure also was not, at that time, conducive of me being my authentic self.
And it sounds like it's one of the reasons you,
Yeah.
if not the major reason.
Oh, it was definitely the major reason.
Are there any particular family stories that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one that is connected to kind of what we're talking about today is my aunt was working with families infected and affected with HIV in the early 90s in Newark, New Jersey. And when I would come up for the summers, that was my day camp.
And she was a social worker.
And she was a social worker, and so she was providing therapy and other resources for the families that were coming through that nonprofit, and that's when I was introduced to HIV prevention. There was a program called RAP, which was Reinforcing AIDS Prevention, and that program took folks from the community, very similar to the TEACH model, from the Newark community to do pregnancy prevention, HIV prevention, sex education, and things of that sort. So we spent the whole summer learning about STIs and sexual health. And then they would go on to bring it back to their schools. And become sexual health champions. What I ended up doing when I came to Passaic High is we tried to start a gay-straight alliance.
That's what you learned in summer camp.
Yeah, that's it. That's what I learned in summer camp. And the school district didn't allow us to do an alliance. And so we were, myself and a few friends were like, well, let's just start a HIV prevention sex education program, and that way we can talk about sexuality in a space that allowed us to sort of explore our identities and our communities and how we fit within our communities. And so that group that we co-founded was Peer AIDS Community Educators, so PACE. And that was through the Office of Domestic Violence, actually. We had to go outside of the school system in order to get the space to even talk, say gay, if you will. And unfortunately, in many parts of the country, we're back there again.
Can't say it. Talking about places in the country, you talked about living in Puerto Rico and living in New York. Maybe if you could get a little bit more granular about neighborhoods you've lived in and what you've enjoyed about them, why you moved there, and are there other places you haven't mentioned yet?
Yeah. So for many years I lived about 9 blocks from where I opened the family planning clinic on 149 in Broadway, which used to be called West Harlem and now is called Hamilton Heights. We won't go down that road. But unfortunately, like many folks in my neighborhood, we got priced out and had to find cheaper living arrangements. And so I loved West Harlem. I will always call it West Harlem, by the way. And that neighborhood has really changed. And unfortunately, a lot of folks that were my neighbors are no longer there.
Okay. And I mean, I could tell you the same story about this neighborhood
Yeah.
right here. I think it's still called East Flatbush, is it? Prospect Lefferts
For now,
Gardens.
for now, yeah.
Let's leave the real estate folks out of it.
Yeah.
Welcome to East Flatbush. What's the most recent book you've read?
So I've been reading The Storyteller's Death by Anne Davila Cardinal. And it's a story very similar to mine. The main character is a girl named Isla who goes back and forth between New Jersey and Puerto Rico, oddly enough. Her grandmother passes away, and she starts seeing the visions of her grandmother's stories. And as other family members pass away, she starts seeing the visions of their stories. And it's such a great book because, verbal history is so important to our communities, right? For many of our, Latino, Black, brown communities, our stories aren't written, right? Somebody else told our stories. And so I think that it's really important for us to tell our stories, right? And for those stories to be heard. And so it's fiction, but it's like really tugging at my heartstrings and really feel super connected to it. It's a really great book.
Okay. So here's a fun question. Why is public service so important?
Public service is so important. I mean, for many reasons, right? But mostly the service part. It gives me purpose in the morning to be able to wake up and know that I can make the difference in a coworker's life or a client's life, a resident's life, a patient's life, a community member's life. And for many years, as I mentioned before, those were the only spaces that would give us a job. And so it feels really, really good to be able to still be in that space, create those spaces, and make sure that there are spaces for folks who look like me to gain a career.
Gave you a job that was based on your own personal attributes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, through Teach, right, if you think about the prevention, as I sort of developed prevention and outreach, I sort of got into contract management of those programs, and that contract management of those programs led into management and leadership. And so at Cal and Lord, I've literally been in, at every level from peer to ED, right? And it's these spaces and these public service spaces that give us the opportunity to grow a career with all of our identities.
So what would be some of the key messages you would share with folks about leadership?
That's a great question, one that I've been struggling with because there's a lot there. But I would say, the biggest key message that I've learned and that I've been encouraged by folks, by allies of our communities that have opened up spaces, by folks who led the way, who are continuing to lead the way, is, when there isn't room at the table, pull up a chair. And I think that our voices matter. As I said, our stories matter, and we need to be at the table, right? And if that chair isn't originally at the table, grab a chair and pull it up, because you belong there. And I think that, again, having been given the space myself to be at the table, has really sort of changed the next generation. And I know the folks before me who set the path for me to enter into those spaces, and so on and so on. And so if there's one key message, I would say pull up a chair.
See, my message would be make some noise.
Yeah. Well, the voice matters.
You could do it in the chair.
Yeah.
Leadership isn't always fun. There are definitely rewards, and then there's a lot of challenges. We've talked a lot about our own personal challenges and things that have been rough, in particular over the last few years. For me, trying to keep program going when you couldn't get people to come to work, even though patients would be coming in and so on, and the communities closed down. That's been a huge challenge for me. What are both the rewards and the challenges of leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think burnout is real, right? Trauma is real. And when you are serving your communities sometimes or extremely passionate about the communities you're serving, you put your full self into it, right? And sometimes that wears you down if you're not paying attention to how your body's reacting, your mind is reacting, your soul is reacting. And so I think that one of the hardest parts of leadership is trying to encourage folks to come to work, to do the work, even when you don't want to do the work that day, because you're feeling really tired and really burnt out, and getting to that point where you get folks to show up to work, to show up for the work, even when you have very little in the tank, is also the most rewarding part, because you do feel a sense of accomplishment. Like, even when I didn't think I could, I still got here, we got through it together, and we'll keep on getting through it together.
And you can get re-energized from people
Absolutely.
who have the energy when you're completely sapped.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So, maybe we could shift gears a little bit and talk about Pride Month.
Mm-hmm.
Pride Month is over.
It's never over.
But, well, we had a long conversation about Pride Month not being over, and every day is World AIDS Day, that kind of thing. So, maybe talk about that a bit. How does celebrating Pride Month impact you?
Yeah, I mean, I think celebrating Pride Month is extremely important. I think all Pride Months, all history months are important. We definitely need to work on together pulling the education outside of those months so that they're all year round in all of our identities. But it creates spaces for the first time for folks who don't have spaces to feel comfortable in their skin, right? And it's a celebration of not only the fight, but the celebration of where we're going, and the re-energizing and giving each other energy to be able to continue on. And so I think that Pride Month is extremely important, as is Black History Month, AAPI Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, et cetera.
We talked a little bit about the local Pride celebrations as opposed to the main one in Manhattan, and I talked a lot about how great Brooklyn Pride was this year, and you see people that you know, and there's this great energy there, and it's got this neighborhoody feel to it. It's not people from all over the world, it's people from Brooklyn and New York City. And you spent some time talking about Queens Pride, Staten Island Pride. Maybe you could talk Bronx Pride, talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, each Pride is so great because it's so different. You go to Bronx Pride and you have a very different experience than Brooklyn Pride. You have a very different experience than Manhattan Pride. Manhattan Pride has become so big and to many commercial, and so now there's a Liberation Pride that's Manhattan Pride on the side of Manhattan Pride, right? And so I think that we, as a community, are really recognizing all of the gorgeous layers that are in our community, and really sort of taking the communities and where they live and celebrating those identities, highlighting those identities in the different boroughs throughout the month and throughout the summer. Actually, when we were in Teach, it was Pride in the City,
right.
Which later became Black Pride.
We should talk about.
Yeah.
Actually, Black Pride was a competing event with Pride in the City, but we should talk a little bit about what Pride in the City was. That was huge.
Yeah, Pride in the City was absolutely amazing. Pride in the City was a weekend that was organized by a nonprofit organization that essentially got us all together as PLCC, and got us to plan for a full weekend. And one weekend was in the park, and that was our family dance party in Fort Greene Park. And the next day was Reese Beach, and throughout the weekend we would test hundreds of folks and provide resources and connect folks to care. But it was about just being in community. And I think that is where a lot of these smaller prides have spun off of in recognizing that we deserve our own pride too. We deserve our own spaces and creating those spaces for themselves.
The collaboration at Pride in the City was incredible. A number of agencies, and we would have this, it was on a field off the beach behind the concrete. It was a baseball field. We had a big tent and
mobile
HIV test
units
counselors
and
from at least 10 organizations, and we organized which folks are going to which group based on age, gender, borough they were coming from, and it was just one spectacular beach party. But everybody was working together for a common cause. It was an incredible feeling to be a part of that.
Yeah, I think what's really important for me in that example is because that really allowed us a space to come together and not compete. Right? Many times funders pit us against each other for the same funding, for the same communities, for the same groups of folks. And so that was a perfect example that we could all come together and serve the community together, not be in competition, but be in fellowship.
Another lesson I learned during Pride in the City, and you might be able to appreciate this having been an ED yourself, is that the leaders at POCC, People of Color in Crisis, which unfortunately no longer exists, they imparted to me the message that always multi-source your events, so that if one agency, if the CDC, just as an example, not that they did this, they don't want to pay for X, Y, or Z, you can go to the AIDS Institute, or you can go to your private foundation. So don't rely on just one agency to put together new and innovative things, because there's always going to be something that they're not going to pay for, be it a good reason or a really stupid one.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why coalitions matter, right? Now with Care for the Homeless, we're part of the National Health Care for the Homeless Coalition, where I've been on the governing board for a while now, and Providers for Healthcare for the Homeless of New York City. And that's really about figuring out how we support each other, right? How do we give each other resources? How do we share best practices, right? We're trying to get away from this sort of adversarial role, and really making sure that if you can't help them, so-and-so can, and if so-and-so can't, you can, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and down the line.
Right. It seems it's not that we're in competition, we're just in complete silos. These days, COVID really had an impact on people even knowing about other agencies. New people coming on don't know about what existed before, and it's just complicated to recreate or come up with something new that is just as effective. A question I meant to ask earlier: who are your heroes?
There's so many. I would say that, like, if starting with folks like yourself, like Donna Futterman, like Anthony Vivassis, who started these mobile programs that came out to the community and found us instead of us having to find you. But then there's also the folks who worked decades on these, like Mary DeClette and Phyllis Pickens, who were on the Hot Van, who welcomed me for the first time as a young queer teen. Then there's the folks who are tried to tell our stories, like ethnographers like Edgar Rivera Colón, right? That spent his whole career trying to tell the Black and brown queer experience, right, in New York City specifically, and now he's expanded that. And folks who led the way in policy realm, like Kimberly Smith, right? But also folks who are considered friends and family, like the trailblazers who are entrepreneurs and starting their own nonprofits for their own communities, like trans leaders like Sean Coleman and Elisa Crespo. These are folks who were again given spaces or demanded spaces, and then created spaces and continue to create spaces for our communities in the way that we need to be served.
Let's not leave out your aunt from
Oh,
summer
yeah,
camp.
definitely my aunt. She is my second mom, and continues to be, and she's been such a huge support.
What are some of the benefits you've enjoyed being the public face of the LGBTQI plus community? Besides for being highlighted here today.
Yeah.
That's one of them.
Well, this is awesome. But I think that one of the benefits is being able to provide visibility for folks who look like me, for younger folks who look like me, who don't necessarily see a career in public service or see a place in leadership or feel that their community is not at the table. And being part of the LGBTQ community has been absolutely amazing, and being a BIPOC member of that community has added to the layers of benefit that I've received in being able to bring my identities to the community, and being able to plug in those identities whenever, depending on which table I'm at, right? And so being able to, in this context, bring the LGBTQ lens at Care for the Homeless, being a person of lived experience with homelessness, to be able to bring that to the services that we provide, being working with the migrant community and being a transplant from Puerto Rico, right? All these identities are important and serve different purposes at different times at different tables. And so it's been really a blessing to be able to have a space at those tables for those identities.
And, we didn't talk much about Care for the Homeless. You just brought that up because it's kind of a shift.
Yeah.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not.
Or maybe not, in terms of the type of organization. So what attracted you to work there, and what exactly are you doing with them?
So as Chief Program Officer, I'm overseeing the residential services, so the shelters, as well as the health services. And so the Care for the Homeless has 25 health centers. They not only have health centers in the shelters that we run, but also have health centers with partners that run shelters. So we have strategic partners like CUCS, Bronx Works, et cetera, that we partner with and have spaces in their shelters to be able to provide health services, behavioral health services. My love for homeless healthcare was it was an obvious connection there, and I feel that, again, sort of bringing the lens to a different area or to a different table, a different voice to a different table, really sort of wanting to bring LGBTQ homelessness and LGBTQ identities in the shelter system, in partnership with our close partnership with DHS, Department of Homeless Services, to be able to bring in that lens of what's going on. We have, for instance, we know that for LGBT organizations that we have LGBTQ folks have a higher rate of homelessness, right? But when you look at our
youth in particular,
for instance, HOT seeing up to like 80% homelessness at Callan Lord, or folks experiencing homelessness, what we're seeing in the shelter system is that folks are going back in the closet because they're afraid of what might happen if they are there in all of their identities, right? And so we should be doing better, and we can do better. Very similar to Coming Out Day, that we've been using it to Coming Out to Your Provider Day, right? Because so that with your medical provider and your behavioral health provider, you can be your full self and have all of the conversations, right? That it's just as important when you're talking about housing.
Yeah, that's an incredible transition, bringing, as you say, the LGBTQ health lens and just bringing it into the housing realm is a real, I guess impactful would be the best word, transition, a place to apply everything you've done up until now, and maybe have affect some change.
Yeah, it's been a month, so we'll see.
What is your vision for healthcare for the future for LGBTQIA plus community, and what good things do you see happening down the road? I see, at least in New York, maybe not in other states in the United States, transgender health has really started to take off here in really, really great ways. But what do you see for the future?
Yeah, I mean, not to be a broken record, but I encourage folks coming up in the ranks that look like me to take the leadership seats in organizations that have always served us, right? Like, to be more active at higher levels so that it's, very much a for us, by us model, which started with HIV prevention. And now, 20 years later, it's time for us to take our executive seats and really sort of help the services being provided and the policies being advocated. Again, sort of that voice coming from the community itself at leadership seats in the organizations that serve our communities.
That's great. I suppose I was always told to stop saying when you're on camera,
Yeah.
so I won't say again.
I say it a lot. It's hard to stop.
I want to wrap things up a little bit. We're a little ahead of schedule. I just want to say this is really great that Dawn has organized this. I want to thank Dawn for organizing this. Getting me to put on a suit is a big deal, especially on any day, but especially in the summer. Stressing about, all right, how am I going to get to work and not have humidity challenged hair and
Be completely sweaty when I get here. I usually bike here. If I take the subway, it's even more sweaty. If anybody's been in Borough Hall train station, it's just a nightmare in the summer. So I guess, having said that, and just trying to keep people engaged for a program like mine, where generational change. What messages would you have for somebody like me in terms of moving forward in the future? We're doing community-based prevention. We're finally out there. The houseball community is opening up again. We talked a lot about our NIH-funded project, Our Family, Our Voices. We're going into community spaces to offer HIV testing again. We're getting people coming back in the doors, lots of new young folks coming in for care. I need your advice. And one of the changes that we've made is we increased our age group. We went from 13 to 24, we're now 13 to 29. And one of the biggest issues we have is like when young people, LGBT folks, age out of the foster care system. And that's where we encounter a lot of them coming in through foster care, and they age out and things kind of fall apart, and we just don't know what the resources are out there. Like what do we do now? We're expanding into more young adult population.
Yeah. That's a great question, and I'm not sure if I have.
We didn't discuss this one in advance.
No, it's all good. But you make a good point with folks transitioning out of systems, right? And transitioning out of care systems, and I think that. Again, now that we're sort of on the other side of the pandemic, if you will, although it's still continuing and very much an issue, especially in poor communities and communities of color, I think that there are agencies and programs like Destination Tomorrow, right, that are creating transitional housing, right, and really sort of partnering with them and figuring out what their needs are and making that connection, right. I think that in talking about coalition and talking about Pride of the City and talking about POCC, right? The lessons learned was let's share resources. What are you doing? What am I doing? And I think that for a lot of great reasons, but sometimes not so great reasons, there's so much programming out there that now it's like, okay, I have this person. I know that there's a program for them. How do I find it? And I think that the more that we start building those coalitions again, and those interdisciplinary coalitions, right? It just doesn't have to be healthcare providers in a room, right? Like, let's get the housing folks, let's get, the policy folks, let's get the advocacy folks, and then let's have that conversation together, right? And then we'll start not only figuring out what everyone's doing and where to refer folks, but also what's left to do, and then figure out who's going to do it.
So it sounds like we're onto something at HEAT. We have this program called Brooklyn is Prepped, and it's based out of downstate, but we finally got, after 3 years, we did a meeting out in the community. Went to Brooklyn Pride Center, where Callan Lord also has, and it was just so wonderful to have people from agencies I've never met before, some of the agencies I've never heard before, just to promote our PrEP services.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of folks in the last 3 years have also started smaller organizations where they identified needs, right? I think that over the last 3 years, not only the violence against Black and brown bodies, not only sort of the police state, not only recognizing racism and how it is just so seeped into everything that is structural in this country, really sort of gave folks the energy and refocus of saying, I'm going to start this, right? And so there's so many more, to your point, organizations that I've never met that are doing really great work that we could all really kind of learn from and connect to.
great. Thank you for those words. I'm going to open it up for some questions, and got the first hand up, but I after we get to this questions, I was really touched when I saw all the young folks. I know there's a lot of summer youth here. There's folks from Theo program, so I want to welcome you all and encourage some of you to ask questions. So, but let's start with Jose.
I guess you guys can all hear me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan, for coming. Jeff, always a reaction. So my question is about, there's a lot of still stigma that goes around our everyday. It goes through mental health. The stigma that suffer our transgender community, it is radical in some points. And there's a lot of isolated efforts that a lot of our organizations are doing excellent work. What can we do as individuals and also as an organization to unify these efforts in the daily basis, that really we see a result that doesn't feel like a competition, it feels as an inclusion to fight the real stigma that also our immigrants that have the terrifying fear to seek for any type of help, with the fear of being, punished or taken out of the country, or our transgender community who suffer from violence, of lack of services or denying of services. What would be our individual recommendation that you will do for us as a person and also as a whole, as an institution, that it should be put done to break that gap?
That's a great question, and I think multi-layered for me. And jump in. I think as individuals, it's the saying, see something, say something, and I would even take it one step further, do something, right? I think that, for instance, with our transgender, gender non-binary, gender diverse siblings, I think that many times we see them being denied, and then we kind of sit back like, oh, that sucks. And that's not okay, right? As individuals, we have the right to advocate for our siblings when they can't advocate for themselves, or join them in the advocacy, right, when they are trying to advocate for themselves, right? And I think that the same thing holds for, migrant folks coming in, right? Where we can help, let's help, right? As we know, the buses coming in, right? Care for the Homeless runs the largest men's intake with DHS and the women's intake health centers, right? Everyone needs a mental health assessment and a physical, right, to sort of get in the system, and that bogs down the system, right? And so then again, we should be able to reach out to our partners to say, we might be drowning a little bit here. What can we do? How can you help? Especially organizations that may speak the language of the migrant that is coming in, right? And we should be able to sort of extend that request across the street if we need to. As far as organizations, I think that we need to be open to those collaborations, find ways, meet people. To your point, not everything has to be a competition, right? We worked together 20 years ago and just reconnected, and it was like, okay, so we've reconnected, let's stay connected now, right? And I think that those relationships are important. So it doesn't have to be a let's sit and plan for this project. Let's keep the relationship. Let's build the relationship. Let's maintain the relationship. And sometimes what needs to happen is going to come out of that organically.
I would jump in on what Jonathan said, do something. I think here at Downstate, nobody's paying me to say this. I'm saying it because I'm involved in all of these processes. I mean, if they pay me to say it, I'll say it even louder. But College of Medicine, for one. How do we change the curriculum? I see Dr. Roman sitting here. We're involved in these efforts to change the curriculum. How do we remove offensive language that we don't even realize is offensive? How do we create inclusive language for up-and-coming healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, et cetera? How do we change that part of the equation? Language is so important. It's everything, to be honest. And so how do we change the language in how we teach medicine and other health professions is one thing. In the hospital side, especially for transgender individuals, hospitals are menacing places. To be denied your humanity and to be told when you walk in for a broken arm just because you're transgender, we don't know how to treat you here. So with Dr. Youssef leading the charge, we've been working very hard at trainings, the hospital leadership level and department by department about not just language, attitudes, understanding someone else's humanity and how to change someone else's biases, in particular about transgender people, but about all LGBTQ folks. So that's a little bit harder, but you have to start, you have to do something, which is what you said. See something, say something, and then do something about it. And I've always prided myself that HEAT provides a safe space, a safe haven for young people to come in and just be their true selves. And what I'm doing right now, next step, trying to expand that. Sometimes you're going against the wind to the hospital as a whole. So thank you for that question. I want it from the young folk in the back. Not to say that you're not a young folk.
Hi. So also being from the ballroom scene, I definitely want to ask, how would you go about sharing safe sex practices / education back into the scene?
So that's a great question. I think that we used to do it well, and then the pandemic hit and we kind of lost our momentum there, right? I think that it's really important to now understand that, how diverse the scene is, right? From the Kiki ballroom scene to the main house ballroom scene to Beyonce's tour, right? We are everywhere, right? And I think that so our approach needs to change a little bit, right? It's not that same like. Here's a $25 stipend, come get tested and talk to me, because I may not need that $25 stipend. I mean, for those who want it, I'll take a $25 stipend. Lunch is very expensive. But it's not just about stipends. And so the approach does need to change. We do need to recognize that the house ball scene is diverse like any other community, right? And it's not a one size fits all. And so we need to sort of take a couple of steps back and learn who we are now, and learn who we are in all of our diversity, and then come up with approaches to be able to be able to sort of bring back those messages. I'm biased because, right, having been a peer educator, I think that when you talk to your family members about, those messages and bringing those messages back into your houses and back into your Kiki houses, your, other houses, I think that folks, a lot of times, they'll hear it. They may not tell you they hear it, but they hear it. I think that when myself and a lot of my family members my age got into HIV prevention, it was because, you're black, you're brown, you're gay, you're gonna get HIV, right? And that was like the early message. So for many of us, we got scared and got into HIV prevention because there was this space, right? But also it gave us a career. It gave us, an everyday, if you will. And so I think that we really just need to sort of take a few steps back, really look at who we are and who we're targeting, look at us in all of our diversity, all right? Because we're not just, not everybody is in one category, for instance. Not everybody vogues, contrary to popular belief. And so really sort of learning who we are as a scene again, and then crafting those messages to create programming.
We after not having had a ball since 2019, I don't know if you were at our ball, but the Heat Ball in April was, I mean, the energy that we brought there to bring young people back in, it was phenomenal. It was the best ball we ever had. I don't say that just because the folks who put it together are sitting in the room. It's the absolute truth, best ball that came out from Heat. And so just being able to open the door for folks again, and we did a collaboration. We collaborated heavily with the Hetrick Martin Institute, the largest LGBT youth organization in the city. They worked with us. We did health surveys, just trying to monitor people's attitudes as they came in the door. We offered HIV testing, and people just had fun. So, so I saw you said yes, you were there, so thank you for coming.
I have three questions
yes.
back here.
Oh boy, you're going to have to wait.
I actually got excited when you talked about being a peer educator, coming from a peer educator experience, because I have a large group of peer educators in the room. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit about how that particular experience, maybe you had a story to share to kind of encourage them, and to kind of talk to them about how important the work that they do, how important that is.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, again, I have bias coming from peer education background. I really think that it can be scary sometimes, right? To learn all this information and then deal with your own emotions, right? And deal with what you're going through in your life, and on top of that, extend yourself to your peers to try to educate them, right? That can be a really scary thing, right? I think that peer education is so important, right? Partially because what's happening. I can't tell you what's happening in your lives, right? You're experts in your own lives, which is why Teach was so important, because it took us from the community and allowed us to educate our community, right? And so, I know it's a lot of information and a lot of information to take back on top of all the feelings that you're feeling, and whether or not you notice it immediately, it makes a huge difference. Not to mention that, like me, it may be a career that is calling you, and so it can snowball into other things in many different ways.
Hi. So I just wanted to ask, what advice would you give to a queer teen right now who's trying to navigate their self through life, and being surrounded by so much stigma against the LGBTQ community?
That's a great question. I think that collectively, we, again, need to recognize the trauma that we go through, both in all of our identities, right? Take that onto the attacks across I mean, violent attacks, but also policy attacks, right, that are happening across the country for our communities. And it's really hard to feel comfortable in your own skin when the where you live is no longer accepting. And it used to be a household where you can find community outside of that household, but as that non-accepting community expands, it feels heavier and heavier, right? And can feel heavier and heavier. What I would say is wherever you can, find community. And community can be in your peer education learning, right? Because you don't all have to have the same background. You don't all have to be LGBTQ identified, right? Being an ally is just as important as, as reaching out to your fellow community members, right? Really sort of finding community and a connection, I think, not only helps you and empowers you, but it empowers the person that you're connecting with. And I think that those connections, as they grow, make us all stronger as a community.
You've been waiting patiently with that microphone, so let's hear your question.
Okay, I kind of have two questions. One you might have addressed already. Will you be working with the new asylum seekers and migrants in the New York City area who are part of the LGBTQ community?
Mm-hmm.
And my second question is something that you said about your story, about being a PK.
Mm-hmm.
How do we open that conversation? How can any suggestions of bringing the chair to the table within a faith-based community?
Yeah, that's a great question. Those are both great questions.
PK is pastor's kid.
Oh yeah, sorry. PK for those who don't know is pastor kids. So the first asylum seekers is yes. We're trying to figure out. I think that we're all trying to figure out as a city how to properly address the needs of migrants coming into the city. I think that as a whole, we are, as an added layer, trying to figure out how to address LGBTQ identities within the shelter system, within homeless services, not to mention then adding being a migrant. And so I think that it's even sort of a broader, not just necessarily related to asylum seekers, but to folks that we are working with in healthcare and in housing, if that makes sense. The PK question is a very interesting one. I think that my growing up in a Pentecostal household wasn't necessarily the easiest thing in all of my identities. And I think that as time has gone on and relationships have been mended, it has allowed for spaces of conversation. Understanding that I wasn't going to change my great-grandmother's idea of whether I was going to hell or not, right, for instance. But being able to sort of sit in love, right, and sit in the family connection, right, to be able to now to go back home with my grandmother in Puerto Rico and talk about how proud she is of me as what was once called gay for pay, because I was a queer professional, right, in LGBTQ health. And so, I think that those opened up the conversations, right? And it's about relationship building. So it may not happen that first time, right? You may plant a seed. And then you go a little bit further the next time, and maybe a little bit further the next time, and then sometimes you get in trouble, right? I was just talking to Dawn about that, and so really, it's about the long game, right? Because these are for many folks, long-established institutions, and very much like, for instance, racism. You're not going to get rid of it in a day. It was very intentionally built over hundreds of years. And in certain contexts and in certain religions, discrimination and bias was built just as intentionally. And so we have to approach it conversation by conversation.
We have some more questions in the back, I believe. We're good?
We're good.
Okay. Brianna.
Hi, Jonathan, thank you so much for being here. All of your words so far have been exceptionally inspirational, and it really contributes to the culture that I know downstate, and certainly us at HEAT try to embody. And so I wanted to ask you if you had pointed words in particular for that really bespeak a message of hope for teens in the queer community, folks who are constantly battling against policies that are intentionally routed against them.
Yeah, I think you start with letting folks know when you can, where you can, that they have a space with you, a brave space. I think the more brave spaces that we create gives young folks a breather, right? Like, I just want to sit, and sometimes I don't want to talk about it, right? But I know that I am loved in this space, and I am accepted in this space. And I think creating brave spaces wherever we can is extremely important because of that, because the attacks are coming from all different areas, right? And sometimes they feel relentless. And so creating that little cocoon when you can, even if it's for a 5-minute breathing break, is extremely important.
We have time for one more question, so, and now all the hands just went out.
Who's first?
You can hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. My name is Josiah Winchester. I represent the Theo program, and I wanted to ask you specifically today. I wanted to ask you, what are some ways a young male, heterosexual, like I could represent the LGBTQ community and I could support them outside of environments like this, except for like my program, like outside in like school, like home, like outside, like what are some ways I could support them?
So first of all, thank you.
No problem.
I think, when we think about LGBTQ rights, when we think about the LGBTQ movement, it hasn't just been folks who identify as LGBTQ as part of that movement, right? And so, one, I commend you being part of the program. Two, for asking the question. It is very important for myself when my heterosexual family members, friends are like, what can I do? This sucks. What can I do? And I think that the first part is doing exactly what you just did. Ask, right? That means so much, and goes really, really far to know that folks have an ally. I think it goes back to when you see something, say something, do something, right? You can be a change maker in your communities. And that can be hard, safety first, obviously. When it is the right time and when you are comfortable, even if it's not necessarily addressing what's happening in a situation, knowing and letting folks know in the LGBTQ community that they have a friend in you. That goes beyond. I can't even properly express it.
Ditto.
Right.
I think, are we out of time?
We can do.
All right,
Yeah.
we got energy here.
Yeah.
Last two.
Thank you so much for speaking and being here. My quick question is, what about also the LGBTQ community and the special needs community as well? Because the special needs community, as you know, there are different types of disability. Mm-hmm. There's the mental disability and there's the physical disability. And they're discriminated as well based on that. How do those individuals that also identify as LGBTQ get the support and help? Is there any services out there as well if they're on the autism spectrum or suffering from schizophrenia or physical disability? And then on top of that, they're also black and brown. So it's almost like a triple, quadruple whammy, so to speak. How do we support them in all of the different aspects that they are also dealing with as well?
Yeah, that's a great question, and perfect question because it's Disability Awareness Month, right? I think that goes back to the layers in all of the identities and being able to take the full person, right? To what you were saying earlier with having a person of transgender experience come in with a broken leg, you don't need to do gender affirming care in that case, right? And so it's taking it in how it comes and addressing those layers, right? As someone who has experienced mental health issues, I didn't want to talk about gay and mental health. I wanted to talk about, my mood swings, right? My depression, right? And there's things that can be interrelated, but it doesn't all have to start with being queer. Right, and so really sort of addressing what the need is and what the primary need is for the person that you are trying to help. There are resources for folks who are experiencing mental health issues, as well as just needing someone to talk to. There are crisis hotlines. We can make sure that we get you that information. Callan Lord, obviously being a resource that I've worked with for the last 2 decades, providing care for 13 and up for LGBTQ identified folks, including both short-term and long-term behavioral health needs.
I could quickly
Yep.
just throw in to that, as just your question remind me of a situation I had in the clinic with a very autistic young person who happened to be transgender, and the mother brought them to me for transgender care, both parents. And the autism wasn't being effectively addressed. And I just had to say, we need to really work on the autism issues and your child's education first and foremost. I'd love to be able to help them become their true self.
Yeah.
But it's a real barrier that the autism hasn't been effectively addressed. So you have to prioritize as well. Anyway.
Yeah, and at Care for the Homeless, we also serve a large population that have SMI, severe mental illness, and with that, you're still trying to figure out housing, right? And so again, it's really about kind of the pulling apart the pieces to get the folks the care and not always kind of conflating them or choose which one should come first.
One more question.
Yeah.
This is fantastic, but we only have one more question, and that's...
So before I ask the question, I wanted to know which parent of yours was the pastor. Was it your mother or your father?
My mother.
Okay, so have you ever been discriminated for being a pastor's kid and being like in the LGBTQ community? Or like how did your mother feel about that? Did she accept you right away, or was she embarrassed because she's a pastor?
That's a great question and a very loaded one. So I don't know if we have enough time for that one. Yeah, no, it's Mama. Hi, Mom. No. That's a great question. So I think that many folks in the LGBTQ community have been burned by religion. And so there's not always a space to be able to talk about your connection with a higher power in queer spaces because folks experience a certain type of trauma. And again, it's sort of recognizing collective trauma, right, in the different way that we've all experienced trauma and being sensitive to that when you're with someone, right? And so although, my spirituality does come into some conversations when I know that that is not necessarily a great space and may trigger someone in the trauma that they may have had in a religious space, then maybe that's just not the time to go into it, right? As far as my relationship with my mother, I think that we've come really far. I think that she has become an advocate in the religious space, and we continue conversation by conversation. We're both learning in our spirituality together. Pastors don't stop growing spiritually just because they become a pastor, and so I think that we have agreed to go on that journey together.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out today. Thank you, Dr. Birnbaum. It's wonderful to have you here and to be such an advocate for us, not just at SUNY Downstate, but in the community and where the need is great. And Jonathan, thank you so much. I tracked Jonathan down. And I just want to say that, you know, last month we celebrated Pride Month, but as you all know, every day we celebrate in some shape, form, or fashion what pride means. And this is one of the, I think this is the fourth thing that we did to celebrate the work that we're doing here as part of SUNY in embracing who we are and what our culture is. So we had done, with Jose's help, we did one video, and I think you might have seen it, and I'll send it out again so you can see it. We also did a piece on Mag Robinson, who was, I mean, he's just phenomenal. That's such an amazing piece. And there was another piece, and I want to thank my team for putting that piece together. They worked really hard at it. And then there was another video that we had with some of our senior folks and other folks in SUNY Downstate who were celebrating the work that we do here and acknowledging how important it is that we continue making sure that everyone feels included and inclusive. So I just want to say thank you all for coming out today. We are going to continue these conversations. As a matter of fact, it's happening. There's another one happening on July 28th. It will be virtual. This is going to be focusing on the 33rd anniversary of the ADA, the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we'd love to have you join us online for that one. You'll get information about that in the next day or so, so please mark those on your calendars. And again, thank you so much for coming out. And I really want to say thank you both again for being so awesome and open. And I know that we've had several conversations about the faith-based piece, and I thank you so much for your authenticity with that, because you know we're all struggling in some way, and we do have to find a way that makes it important for all of us to feel wanted, welcomed, and loved. Thank you all.
This is great.
Awesome.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, one last thing, please. If we can get everyone together for some shots up front, we'd love to. Thank you.
Do we get to
Yeah.
stay in our seats?